Thank you for joining us on the first episode of the New Perspective podcast. Really pleased to be joined by a couple of special guests today. To my left is Dominic Briant. Dom is the Head of Funding and Research at Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing. He heads up MTVH's Migration Foundation and all of their tenant welfare support. And to my right, we have Chris Harris. Chris is the relatively new Chief Exec of Arhag Housing Association based in Stratford in East London. And my wonderful colleague, last but not least, Suzanne, fellow director at New Perspective Group. So thank you, Dominic and Chris. How are you both doing? You well?
Fantastic. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely great and happy to host. So good to see you here.
Brilliant. Hopefully nobody's feeling nervous. We're all relaxed and ready to go. Chris?
Really well chilled.
Chilled.
Happy to go for it.
We chilled the room beforehand. That's why, you see. We got it down to 19 degrees. So first off, maybe, Dom, you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So after a weird and wonderful and short spell in the leisure industry, I had a big hard look at myself and thought, where could I actually be making a difference? And I was lucky enough to start what turned into a decade-long career in the Red Cross, doing everything from sweeping up and making the tea all the way through to eventually being a regional director with accountability for humanitarian services, work with the NHS ambulance services, and along the way a lot of work with refugees, people seeking asylum and those trying to find safety from human trafficking. And that's the part that really ignited me. And I was lucky towards the end of that career to get the opportunity to join Metropolitan, as it was then, and lead its Migration Foundation, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about later. And that's what I've been doing since. My role's evolved, and it's evolved in an exciting way. But that's the core of what I do and why I do it.
Fantastic. Chris?
Well, I can't believe it's over 30 years ago that I started working in the sort of housing and voluntary sector. So I started off at the YMCA, so working with minority groups in East London. And I've been I've had a fabulous career over the years in the housing sector, working for some wonderful organisations. But for me, it got to a point of working locally and with specific groups. Took the move to work for Arhag about 14 months ago, and to really focus on sort of migrant and refugee issues and go back to the beginning of my career and those days at the YMCA. So looking forward to doing some great work going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you. So it's handy that you both have that background in interest in migrants, as that's the topic today. It's almost as if we'd planned it. So, Tom, let me ask you first, given your background in at the Red Cross, we're obviously going to talk about migrants, migration, refugees and housing. But first off, I think one of the things that many people don't understand is why are there so many migrants and refugees so desperate to come to the UK? You know, what's happening back home that makes them want to come here in the first place?
There's probably two ways that I want to answer that. The first one is that if you think about our history as a country and you think of our fingerprint that's on the world, both good and bad, there's a rich heritage of English language, of our systems, if you think about our legal system in particular. So there's an affinity with Britain. And then, of course, because of historic migration, there's a lot of people in Britain with connections around the world. So if you were personally faced with a crisis that was upending your entire life, whether it's conflict, whether it's your government making your very existence questionable, or whether actually it's just the crippling lack of opportunity, there's just no way of making a livelihood for yourself, you probably wouldn't stay put. There's an inbuilt human instinct to survive and to continue. That's why we are where we are now. And Britain is one of the places where you would potentially have an affinity with because of that history. The other way I want to answer that question is actually comparatively for the world, particularly when it comes to refugee issues, we're not a major recipient in numbers terms of refugees. Actually, the majority of the world's displaced people, which now goes into the tens and tens and tens of millions at a level we've never seen before, most of those people are either just across the border from the country they've fled, looking for safety, or near enough. And to give you an example of that, Zatari refugee camp in Jordan, which has seen an influx of people from multiple crises across the Middle East, is bigger than Leicester. we don't have that level of migration from a humanitarian point of view into the UK because of our geography. So there is a demand, there is an interest, but we do also have to put that into perspective.
Yeah, because we're given the opposite story. It's like every refugee and migrant in the world just wants to come to the UK to simultaneously take all of our jobs and be on benefits. At the same time, I'm still not quite sure how that narrative works out, but it's not the case necessarily that every refugee and migrant is basically going through every single country they can to get here. But there are some who are.
Yeah, and I think if you have a view of a group of people and you look hard enough, you will find examples that justify that. There, of course, are people that through survival, once they get to the UK, fall into the black economy, that life doesn't work out for them in the UK, that they have other motivations. But the majority of people you'll meet are simply looking for a dignified existence, as we all would. And I'd like to think, as being a British citizen, that we'd be one of the places where you could have a dignified existence. But even if you just look within Europe and you look at comparable Western nations, there are far higher numbers of refugees in places like Germany and actually France and some of the other Mediterranean countries, particularly if you think of proximity to Northern Africa. So we do have to put it in perspective. It's not to say that there isn't kindness in Britain. We did accept tens of thousands of refugees in Syrian resettlement. We're doing the same again with Afghanistan. There's been an outpouring of public support for Ukraine. So it's not to diminish that kindness, but I think we have to temper that and balance that with what goes on around the world.
Chris, let me come to you. And obviously, maybe you just want to tell us a little bit more about Arhag as a housing association, because it's very specialist, isn't it, in terms of what it does?
Mm-hmm. So I think we do have that USP. So 1979, African Refugee Housing Action Group was born, Arhag. And since that day, really, the organisation has had an absolute drive to work with migrants and refugees through its landlord services and really, I think, to connect us and other organisations together to provide quite a holistic approach to the individual or the family that enables them to access the community and, picking up on some of the things that you were saying, really make sure that they've got that life fulfilment and embediment into the local community.
Yeah. Question for both of you, really. What are the challenges, just again for context, that people are facing on their journeys here? And then also the challenges once they actually arrive in the UK? Kind of, Chris, we'll start with you, and then Dominic, feel free to chip in, and Suzanne as well. I suppose you've done some as well, haven't you? So
I think I'll take it in the broadest sense. I think the biggest challenge is the unknown. So I think it's the journey unknowns that we hear about in the transition or journey from one place to another to get to the destination point. It's the unknown variables of what people are going to come up against and face to be able to get to the destination point. And then once at the destination point, again, it's the unknowns about how are they going to access, how are they going to integrate, and how are they going to sustain themselves in the destination point to be able to create that new life and to be able to rebuild their environment. So I think for me, a lot of it is about the unknown and how do you overcome that, especially when you've got children and other family members that are travelling with you. So that would be my starting point on that one.
Yeah, I really resonate with what Chris has said. Crisis and being in an enduring crisis is exhausting because there's not only that you have to live from day to day and you can't plan or think about the future, but that uncertainty and having to learn new systems in a way, some of which are informal, some of which are about where you are and about pure survival, occupies everything you do. And I think most people can picture that. If you ever think about a personal crisis they've experienced, it becomes all consuming. And then for refugees in Britain, you might get some form of safety. You might get a piece of paper that says effectively you're legitimate in the eyes of the British system and you can stay here. You have leave to remain, a curious term in some ways, and then actually becomes the rest of your life. And my experience is that is sometimes when things fall apart for people because they've been surviving and they've been going from day to day to that point and they've just been learning how to survive. And now suddenly it's about a future. And that becomes even more daunting. And that's a new point of worry. That's a new dawn. And all along that way is really an experience of trauma. that can affect people for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, Suzanne, just before obviously we started recording, you were mentioning, a young migrant that you're working with who's facing some challenges at the moment. Do you just want to, tell us a bit more about that?
Well, absolutely. So he's a 22-year-old. He's Somalian. He arrived here, granted leave to remain, but in the middle of his exams, and was literally that day thrown out of the government hostel. And so 22-year-old young man, no family here other than an aunt who's overcrowded and can't take him, literally thrown onto the streets with bags. And, how on earth does someone keep it together? Well, he did, the most remarkable young person. But, when you think of the insurmountable journey that somebody's been through to get to that point, and then, we talk about the hostile environment in the context of Windrush, but actually, how hostile was that, an act of the state, to that mild-mannered young man with nowhere to go?
How did we get here? So, how do we get to this place where we've become so anti the other? And just almost to the point of, it's to proudly say as a country that we will create a hostile environment for somebody who's in such dire need. I don't know if anyone's got any insight into, what happened, because it just seems so inhumane to most people.
I think about this quite a lot, and it can be hard to think about because there's not a huge amount of joy in what comes out. I think we're at a low point in trust amongst each other for who's in power, for who represents and leads us, and that cuts across a number of issues, not just refugee and migration issues, and trust of newcomers, which is really an entirely emotional thing. It drives a lot of powerful decision making, and I question myself sometimes, and I think, have I really reached the end of my naivety? When are the government going to run out of political capital in being tough on migration? We have a leadership runoff at the moment in the Conservative Party, where the new chapter to verify your credentials for leadership of the party is how tough are you going to be on migration, and we also have a government that believes, and I think it does genuinely believe in some quarters, that sending a small number of people to Rwanda who've been seeking safety at the cost of, some would say, up to £1 billion to achieve that on a regular basis is the morally right thing to do because it disrupts trafficking rings. We've almost got to a point where the emotion of the situation and the emotion of the complexity of the situation has overtaken all reason. And I think you see that at a government level, but you also see that interpersonally as well. Then, just to be slightly contrary, you do see up and down the UK groups of normal people, regular people from all walks of life, being incredibly hospitable and kind. We can't lose sight of the fact that by this time next year, there will probably be around 150,000 Ukrainian refugees here, most of whom will have been supported, welcomed and housed and sponsored by everyday British citizens in parts of the UK that previously actually haven't done a lot when it comes to welcoming refugees to Britain. There's a lot to that. I'm sure we'll talk about that. That's good and bad. But it's interesting. It's not all one story. It's complex. But I think the lack of trust that we have between us and we have in people who represent us is driving a lot of the fear and a lot of the emotion.
So the whole Ukrainian situation obviously really, was upsetting to a lot of people just for the double standards. So all of a sudden the government was okay with people, coming over and expediting the process as much as they could, made finances available for people who would take them on. And obviously they retracted it slightly afterwards, even happy for people to go out and fight, which is something, if it happened with some of the other migrant countries, there'd be a few issues, I think. But why was there such a disparity in response, do you think? Obviously you might not, it depends how much you want to comment and how much you're able to comment. Obviously from the outside looking in, it just felt like such a double standard.
think some of these things are driven by long-standing beliefs about different groups of people, and I think this has been decades in the making. And you can even say, if you go back to the origins of things like the Refugee Convention and you look at the way that Jewish refugees were treated prior to the Second World War, there's an interesting history there that's not quite as worthy as we have subsequently kind of described history to be. I think if you look at the way that refugee crises are being treated, there's been a long-standing view amongst politicians who are grappling with the issue that there's almost two camps. One is those that are suddenly facing conflict and need some managed paths to resettlement. And I think Theresa May described them as the weak and the vulnerable, also meaning mainly women and children in that connotation. And then those that have decided for their own reasons that they cannot or they have no future in their own country and they need to leave and they need to seek safety, which is people that are seeking asylum. There was a statement which is those people are the rich and the powerful. Now, I've met a lot of people seeking asylum and I've not met a single one who's rich and powerful, so I'm not sure where that idea's come from. But there's almost a view that there's the manageable, which is the sudden opportunity for us as a country to do what we do well and to manage a pathway. That Ukraine, Afghanistan, Syria to a certain extent. And then there's everything else which is going on around the world, which is chaotic and uncontrollable. And I think that's the truth, is that I think that politicians faced with what they have on their plate want the controllable, want something where they can bring a solution, and they are terrified of uncertainty and what they see as chaos.
So one of the comments I've heard is that the issue around people arriving through, let's call it illicit routes, is because there's no legitimate route to arrive in the UK and claim asylum. I'm interested in your views on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think just going back to the earlier point, I think part of it is about collective understanding of where the people are coming from, what's been the cause behind it, and I suspect with a lot of our nation, it feels much closer to home with Ukraine, and therefore it's much more familiar, and it's probably easier to be able to attach to in terms of something that might happen further away. And I think in terms of Suzanne's point about routes and access, part of the challenge for people is that there aren't any defined routes and access points. So therefore people will find a different way of trying to access the destination point that we were talking about earlier. And I think part of the challenge is that whole welcoming part on that destination and access point isn't very welcome. So people try to find a different way to be able to circumvent that and then come into the country to be able to start that life again, really. So and I think I was reading somewhere that there are new routes opening up and other ways round that people are looking at. But the whole thing about not allowing people to come in and trying to turn back is something that isn't helpful. And what we need to be doing is enabling people to get to that destination point and then giving them that collective support that they need to be able to rebuild and move forward. But we do lots against being able to for them to achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, nice segue into my next question, really. Why do you care? As housing associations, both as Arhag and Metropolitan, isn't your job just to be a landlord and, put a roof over people's heads? Why such a focus on migrants and why do you care, really?
Yeah, I think for us there's probably two answers to that. One is about the why am I in housing, and it's about social value and why do we provide the housing that we do and link into community and other organisations. But I think for Arhag it is about those roots from 1979 and why we exist. So for us it's really important to be a very good landlord, but actually to have that mission and vision around working with migrants and refugees is really important to us. That's our core purpose. So to provide an opportunity to work with partners to address the personal or the family requirements for people that are coming into this country is really important to us. And actually, if we didn't do that, we would just be another landlord or housing provider. And I think as a sector, there's so much more that we can do in terms of providing those types of services and linking together to be able to use our collective resources to be able to support people.
Yeah, hold that thought, because we're definitely going to come back to that when we start talking about what more can be done. But Dom, why do Metropolitan Care?
So for MTVH, it's our day one history, similar to Arhag actually. So we were founded in the 50s to provide housing to the Windrush generation, actually to Jamaican women principally to begin with, and we've grown out from there. But those are our roots, that's our DNA. And at various stages in our history, we've run things like the Refugee Housing Association. So it's been a subject that's been very close to home for us. And then I think more broadly for housing associations, whether we're the very large ones or whether it's small and specialist ones that are embedded in their communities, our time spans are very, very long, like almost no other community organisation. We're talking 30, 40 years working in the same community. And you get to see change over a very long period of time. And I know that refugee migration issues can be very charged and very emotional, but for us, migration is nothing new. It's going to continue in some form or another, both economic and humanitarian. It's going to happen. Communities are what they are. It's very normal for Britain. And when it works, it's very normal. We've both got colleagues who have got refugee migration in their background. We've got residents who are from that world who get on in everyday life in Britain and make it what it is. And I would rather live here than other places because of that. And I think it's something that's a shining example of who we are at our best. Not necessarily something to be afraid about, because for us with those timeframes, it's normal.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a second generation immigrant, which I forget sometimes, and so without migration in the UK, I wouldn't be here anyway. Having that conversation, it'd just be Suzanne and you both, I imagine.
I'm second generation too. I hate to tell you that.
Yeah, no, I remember now. So you wouldn't be here. It would just be Chris and Dom. And then I suppose if we go back far enough,
absolutely,
you wouldn't be here either.
No.
Nobody would. So migration's not going anywhere, is it really? What are your respective organisations doing on this agenda specifically? So thinking about the general, obviously providing housing and so on, but then going down into some of the more specifics, what are you up to? What sort of work that you're doing at the moment?
I mean, one of the main things we do is the building that we're sitting in today is we provide an environment for a hub partnership with others that provide services in this area. So we've got Doctors of the World, Ramfel, ICRO, MRN, who provide different types of services to support people in the community. So what we've recognised is that as a small organisation and a landlord, there are things we can do, but there are also things we can enable others to do through the work that we do and the resources that we have. So one of the keys to us is the partnership here at the Hub in Stratford. We have a hostel where we support people coming into the community and working through that. And we do other initiatives like Russ Sleeper Initiative. And a few years ago, we did the tampon tax project, where it gave training, support, employment opportunities and benefits advice to BAME women. So it's a broad portfolio of the things we do. But what's central to it is being an enabler for others to do the broader work out in the community and be accessible to those that need those services.
Yeah, that's great. And there's that interesting dynamic here, isn't it, with Arhag being at one end of the spectrum, being quite small and localised and specialised, and then you've got MTVH at the other end, one of the big giants of the UK housing sector. So what are Metropolitan up to?
So before I doff our cap with feathers, I'd like to say to Chris and to Arhag, I think it's brilliant to be in this building, because I can remember when it was just talk, and it sometimes feels at the moment that getting things done and innovating is harder than it's been before. And actually we are here right now in something that was considered actually quite far-fetched a couple of years ago, and we're here and it's working, and there's a lot more to come. So I think it's fantastic. Just like to say well done to Arhag and to the partners that have worked on it. So for MTVH, I guess there's what we do every day as an organisation. We've got customers from 95 different countries around the world who we like to think we provide a high level of service to, whether it's people who are just getting their first affordable home, or whether it's people thinking about ownership and all the ways that housing can fit into their lives. We also are leading the G15, which is a collection of London's largest housing providers, houses 1 in 10 Londoners. And as part of that, the challenges of the moment, particularly when it comes to Ukraine and Afghanistan, we're providing leadership on that. So we've made it very, very straightforward within the first few weeks of the Ukraine crisis for all of our residents to sponsor if they want to. Regardless of their tenure, they can talk to us, and we are trying to make it absolutely easy and positive, and to provide those people and the people that they host with the support required to make it work. We've also been resettling and providing housing resettlement to people from Afghanistan and Syria. And that's a very normal thing for us to do, because it's us doing what we do. It's providing homes to families. And we do that where local authorities, we have the stock and we have the availability to do that. Then there's a specialist part of MTVH which I'm privileged to lead, which is our Migration Foundation. We've been running the Migration Foundation for 15 years now, and it's endowed with our own money to have an agenda-free income that we can invest to try and alleviate destitution that might be experienced by migrants in the UK. So as part of that, we were a funding founder of NACOM, the No Accommodation Network. We're currently a core funding provider of the Asylum Support Appeals Project, and work very closely with organisations like Praxis, community projects in London, on their own responses. And recently we've taken a bit more of an operational direction with that, where we're starting to step in and provide more of our own housing innovation and demonstrate what can be done. 2 or 3 years ago, we set up the first hostel for destitute migrants in the UK. Hanif, I know you and colleagues have visited. We're expanding outwards from that, and actually, thanks to the evaluation that New Perspectives Groups helped us with, we're considering actually perhaps boldly going in that direction and directly responding to meet more of those housing needs ourselves through the gaps that exist.
Yeah, I have to say it's so great just kind of hearing what both organisations are up to. And for me, it was a bit of a shock, to be honest, kind of coming from where I'd been, and there wasn't that much talk about the migration agenda. It was very kind of housing focused, and then kind of stepping out and seeing what everybody else is up to was very eye-opening for me. I don't know, Suzanne, you might have had a better feel for what was happening in the sector wider anyway. But
no, I think that there's a real conversation needed to and I think that when people start to articulate the work that they're doing and the inroads they're making, then hopefully then governance structures will kick in, and other providers might start thinking they have a role morally, which they need to start being active in the space and contributing. And then you might find that there's a head of steam building up. So I think that it's a story to be told.
Yeah. What are the challenges that you're facing? We haven't got that long, but if you're gonna summarise the challenges that you're facing, particularly on this agenda at the moment.
I think the challenges for us are balancing the landlord service and also the other services that form part of our mission and vision. So I think there's a day-to-day operational challenge for us. I think the other challenges for us, and we touched on this just now, is about the difference in size and resources and the ability to do the things that we'd like to do. So for us, it's about the challenge for us is finding the right partners to join us in this partnership that add value and further the work of us and our current partners. And the challenge for us is about making sure that we play our role meaningfully within the sector in terms of enabling people to connect with each other and being that go-to place for migrant and refugee information and advice. Because I think there are a lot of people in the sector that struggle to find the basic information with the basic understanding about what the requirements are and what are the types of things and services that we should be providing. So I think for us as an organisation, it's about working with others in a collaborative way to be able to provide some of the things that we're doing, which is why it's incredibly useful that I've made this contact today, and I'll be taking his card to send him a few messages. But I think the challenge is connecting each other, and actually we're all trying to do very similar things in a very similar way. And I think we just need to talk a bit more and break those barriers down, and then we can achieve so much more together as a collective.
Yeah, such a huge challenge across the non-profit sector. Generally, everyone's got very good intentions, and is so kind of focused on the day-to-day and the grind that it's hard to lift your head up and, take note of what's going on and then make those connections and work together with other people. But if the sector did that, oh my God, what an impact, we'd be able to have. I suppose, Dom, you've got slightly different challenges.
Yeah, and I get to work a lot with those organisations that are supporting refugees and migrants from the community upwards or regionally or nationally. One really inspirational chief exec I met recently described it at the moment like catching hand grenades, which I think is a fair comment and illustrates what life is like when you're trying to lead an organisation and deal with the challenges that get thrown your way, whether it's government policy, whether it's lack of funding, whether it's funder behaviour actually, and the way that sometimes the system operates against itself to get things done.
What do you mean by that? Just expand on that a little bit for us.
Well, I think there's the supply of money to support social action is probably not enough for what needs to be done. And money's always tight, whether it comes from funders, whether it comes from government. And we're in a period where risk taking is not being encouraged. Positive risk taking is not being encouraged. A lot of people are thinking about risk, and there's a lot of nervousness, and it starts to result in isolated thinking. So if you were a chief exec of a refugee charity, let's take Migrants' Rights Network that's in this building, thanks to Arhag and the partnership. If you were running that and you were thinking about how to sustain yourself and grow and meet the need and reach the people in the way you can, you're probably dealing with multiple funders, all of which have application processes in different ways, all of which have different expectations around topics which are of the now, like lived experience, like diversity, like who's running the organizations, the power balances in those organizations, alongside keeping the lights on and effectively still being a business with income and expenditure at the end of the day. So it's those organizations are having a really, really tough time. And I think that the leadership of those organizations is kind of exhausted. And so and I think this is a great example where we're sat here today, need to inject a bit of positivity into that and a bit of energy into that. And the challenges are really, really tough, but it doesn't mean we can't take joy from collaboration. We got a lot done during COVID together, whether it's housing associations, some of which maybe should have been always working together, but or whether it's just a range of community partners getting things done in different ways. We did some great things to keep the wheels turning, and we should take courage from that, and we should keep going because there's potential there. There's further potential. I think we're maybe in a bit of a lull. We're catching our breath and we're collectively a bit tired. But I think some good things will come because they have to.
Just thinking about that a little bit more, what can or what should other organisations, housing associations and others, what do you think they should be doing now, kind of going forward, just thinking, both short-term and long-term in terms of addressing this issue? Because, as we've talked about, it's not going away. And not only is it not going away, it's probably going to get a lot worse before things hopefully get better. So just free for all really. What do we do?
I think for us it goes back to an earlier point really. It's about coming together and working together, and it's about seeking joint opportunities, whether that's on a geographical basis or a sector basis or a regional basis, to be able to pool our resources together and do some joint ventures in terms of some of the work that we do. So for me, I think one of the things the sector could do more of is that joint working and project working. We're in a very positive way. We're part of BME London Landlords. We're part of BME National. We're also part of the G320, which is the smaller organisations across the country. So some of those networks already really exist, but I think it's about building more local networks with some of our neighbours to make sure that we're doubling up on our resources and our efforts, and actually we're working with our neighbours to be able to further our calls and services. So I think there's something there about joint project work and collaboration in terms of the organisation. And I think there's something about smaller and bigger organisations perhaps not quite twinning or being sponsored, but I think where you've got a smaller quite unique organisation, it's about working with larger organisations that have a local interest and us working together to be able to really get down into the grassroots of the community to make a difference. And I think we could do a bit more of that in terms of that joint grassroots working in terms of the local community.
Yeah. Why is that not happening though? So this isn't a new issue. And like I said, it's across the sector. It's not just around migrants, just across the non-profit sector generally. Why is it that people are so, why is the service so fragmented, I suppose? Like I say, there are networks that have been established. But so Suzanne's, that young gentleman that you're working with and supporting, I imagine from your perspective and from his perspective, how amazing it would be to just know that there's this one place that you can go to and all the organizations are there together and he'll get the right support, as opposed to having to chase your tail a bit trying to find the support that he needs. Why don't we have that already?
I think when it comes to refugee and migration issues, when we look at the civil society response, so the charity sector, for want of a better word, that responds, I think we fall into a trap of calling them a sector. If you look at what life is like for them in terms of sustainable funding, consistent and rational government policy, clear public will, I don't think they've got any of that. And so I think they've done a good job to survive and to have some form of response. The fact there is still agencies that will help you at tribunal. There are, in most towns and cities in Britain, there's cities of sanctuary groups, so there's people coming together to share things. The fact there's some form of coordination, I think, is to be celebrated, because there are times when I think it could have almost entirely disappeared. And there have been, just as there have been in other issues actually in British public life, big swathing cuts that have come at a very challenging time, that have made recovery from that and growing again quite difficult. I think to challenge that sector and to challenge ourselves, we do need more collaboration. I think we will have to be looking at more digital collaboration to deal with the challenges that are to come. While I think there are times when a human being needs to talk to a human being, there are other times when they don't necessarily have to. And maybe that's an opportunity for the future for us to think about scale. And then I think beyond that, in terms of challenges and local partnerships, it's about trust, isn't it? And it's about organisations being able to, if I speak about big housing associations now, being able to look above the parapet of very important building safety issues, hugely important housing supply issues, and then to remember why and to think about the purpose and what grounds you in where you've come from and where you're going. And I think that's starting to happen with a lot of organisations. We can't just exist to have safe buildings. That is our number one priority right now. And it's right that we take those lessons, but that's not, we can't just exist to do that.
Yeah, I really think that the sector's in a really interesting place at the moment, reputationally. And I'm thinking through, as we're talking, how refugee and migrant work could play a part in reputational mending, for want of a better word. But also thinking about how the media plays out the whole issue and how it's a political football. And I don't know the answer. I don't know if any of you have got any thoughts.
Chris has said a couple of important things that we throughout this that are a starting point, which is before we get into the kind of complexities and the technicalities and what the policy may or may not be, just remembering why we're all in this and remembering who we are as individuals and how those individuals add up to an organisation. And if I think about why MTVH has taken certain decisions, I mean, it was potentially quite risky for us to set up the hostel environment we did. And why did our board, who are a different board to the one we have now, why did they decide to do that at a time? And why has that confidence almost grown with the risks that have been taken? And I think it's about coming back to your purpose, being able to educate yourself a little bit, being able to fill in where you have worries or doubts about what you're doing. The information's out there and the knowledge is out there. And actually, the organisations that are on the ground, whether it's specialist organisations like Arhag or whether it's the refugee councils or refugee action, the people are there doing the work. I don't think it's necessarily a point of reinventing. I think it's about taking what's already there and building something better together. But I do really think it comes down to something straightforward, which is remembering why you exist and using that to build confidence.
So I've had this thought for a while now that what was really, really wrong in the sector was pre-Grenfell, when all of the emphasis was upon benchmarking cost per unit. So benchmarking cost per unit was the holy grail, according to the regulator. And for some people, that was a race to the bottom. And kindness kind of got lost in some quarters. And also then we had the digitalisation, which in some cases, I think tech is a power for good, but it's got to be used in a good way and not just in a way that makes the landlord a faceless entity which you can't get to because you can't even make a phone call anymore, let alone see a person who is your housing officer in a local office. And I think that the Grenfell tragedy has been a complete milestone for this sector, and we've almost got to rebuild from that point. So thank goodness after that, there's been a massive return to listening properly to residents, and also not cheapest is best at whatever cost. And I just think that there has to be a return to kindness. And I also think that the pandemic has been extremely difficult for the sector because, again, it took people away from the front line. And, we were in complete crisis worldwide, really. So I think the whole conversation around migrant and refugee work can be part of a return to kindness. And to the focus on the people, and the people who are at the heart of what we're doing, and for whom we can make a difference. Did we get that right?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I've seen over the years, Suzanne, is that how housing's influence on its surroundings, its community, key partners, local authorities has increased over the years. So I think we are now recognised as a provider that can provide different solutions, different support, and we're quite often now at the table with local authorities in terms of case conferences and in ensuring that the customer's welfare is paramount in the issue that is being faced. So I think as a housing provider, it's about recognising the influence we have locally, but having come from bigger organisations, we can provide from employment opportunities across different disciplines, from IT to HR to housing to technical to, all sorts of things. And actually, I think we've got the collective ability to be able to provide lots of different opportunities. And there are some really good programs that go on across our sector that we should be really proud of in terms of whether it's training or mentoring, or whether it's, working with third-party contractors in terms of social value, and investing in our sector. So I think there's a lot of positive things there, but I think we have an awful lot to offer in terms of the scope of roles and opportunity that we could provide as a sector. And this building is a good example of that, is that we, many of us have head offices, we've got community centres, we've got resources. It's about us maximising those resources to enable others to use them for their benefit.
There's a few kind of really interesting threads that have come through. That bit about partnership, like we said, is always about trust. And fundamentally, that comes down to people. And one of the issues that you have is churn. So, people build relationships with people, somebody moves on, and all of a sudden that relationship kind of breaks down. And so we almost need to find a way of, making those relationships stick a little bit more, not necessarily formal, but structured and a bit more robust, so that even if individuals move on, that those relationships between those organisations are there. And like you were saying, Dom, that comes back to the why, and that's a real challenge, I think, as organisations get bigger. And like you say, the bureaucracy comes and there's just more, weight on your shoulders, really, and more responsibility to bear, that those things can take over, and you kind of lose focus a little bit about what your organisation was there for in the first place. And it's great to kind of see two organisations who haven't lost that root and still hold that quite strong, because I think we've all seen organisations that have lost their way a little bit over the years. There was something you said, Dom, as well, about kind of the need for digital, and I think that's one of the few positives to come out of COVID, is that the sector as a whole, as in the kind of wider non-profit sector, if you like, is a lot more comfortable with tech now than it used to be. I'm a techie. I've been shouting about it for years. Everyone told me to go away. Now we're here. All the geeks will be taking over now, and it's obviously out of that frustration was New Perspective, the digital arm was born. And I just think it's such a shame that the sector hasn't up till now really influenced everything that they do with digital. Even think about influencers. Why aren't non-profits like influencers on social media? You're not trying to sell anything to anybody, you're actually trying to help people. You'd think that there would be that message would resonate so heavily. Obviously we need to find the right characters to be in front of camera and do those sorts of things, but there's so much scope, and like I say, that the ability to be able to reach so many people, not to ever detract from the need for in-person support. Just what are your thoughts about kind of the whole digital agenda and where we could be going with this?
Well, I'm going to start sort of back to front with the point around influencers. We're kind of we're seeing it happen to us through some of the social housing standards activists that are out there on Instagram and TikTok and speaking truth to power, and probably having more of an impact than the likes of Panorama or some of those sort of investigative pieces, because it's reaching people quickly. It's reaching people that have decided they want to connect to the issue, so they're going to keep looking at it. It's reaching people that are currently experiencing the issues. And you see a power in that. You see activists meeting with chief executives like our own, like Geeta Nanda, or meeting with the chair of the National Housing Federation in the way that perhaps someone else wouldn't, because we're not perfect. We do make mistakes. And I think people would accept that you can make mistakes, but it's about candor. It's about being open with what you're doing and how you're trying to improve. And that's probably the point in all of this about digital, not digital, etc. is we've been talking about refugees and migrants almost as if there's two camps, as if there's, refugees and migrants are all terrible and refugees and migrants are all good. Refugees and migrants, alongside everyone else, are human. And being human is about a personal understanding of who you are and what makes you tick. And that's probably what we need to instill. And we're seeing the demand for that happen to us. And housing associations, though we might not be at the forefront of digital, we're quite good at catching up, I think, in a range of our other issues. Maybe we'll start to catch up with those things. Maybe we'll start to use digital rather than managing demand and putting people in boxes. Maybe we'll use it to have more of a personal, deeper relationship with you, the human.
Yeah, and I always think the smaller organisations are the ones that trailblaze, because they don't have to go through 20 policy committees to get something signed off and like a massive comms team and so on. Chris, I know we've had an earlier conversation just about digital. What are your thoughts and where would you like to see things going?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about over-complexing things earlier, and I think sometimes with digital you can over-complex them. So I think for us, there's probably two areas. One is about it's about making sure we've got the right data on our customers and our communities that drive our investment and our energies to make a difference. So I think across the sector, having that data and perhaps sharing some of that community data is really, really useful. And I think in terms of the other point really is that I think in a smaller organisation, we can be quite innovative. So I think in an organisation like ours in Stratford in East London, and given our mission and vision, there's an opportunity, I think, to be quite innovative and creative with a very diverse set of customers that can really trial and try and get some really great feedback in terms of some different digital things going forward. So I think there's an opportunity there for us to engage with those providers much more positively. But also I think learn from each other in the sector, because we've all got systems that do very similar things that are slightly different, that we've all bought from somebody slightly different. And I think as a collective, again, we use that word collective quite a lot during this conversation, but I think as a sector we could probably do more in terms of our joint procurement power to be able to get services and systems that do what they need to do, that allow us to invest the residual into things that really matter, which is about social value and social investment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's so much about, on the one hand, getting people's attention. And we know kind of digital and social media is a fantastic way of getting people's attention. And then it's about delivering a message, and doing that in a powerful, impactful way. And I think, again, when we come back to that example of that young man you're working with, Suzanne, just being able to have, those online resources available for you or for other people who are working at the front line, with people from lots of different backgrounds, including migrants and refugees, and being able to, like you were saying earlier, Chris, a lot of these resources people are creating and they're using locally, they're really fantastic, aren't they? But lots of people have got their own versions of that, and there's a lot of duplication there, and being able to come together and make that available all of a sudden just reduces the workload, I think, on the front line for people, and just improves the quality of what's available and the access to everybody. So obviously digital is not going to be for everybody, but it definitely feels like the sector is going to have to move in that direction and not be scared. Because I know housing associations typically are really scared of social media because everybody complains about repairs and those sorts of things. So usually when you check out people's Google reviews, or someone posts something on social media, someone's just having a go at them straight away, and then people shy away from that. But like you were saying, Suzanne, earlier, there's an opportunity there to also demonstrate, like you're saying, Dom, not everybody's perfect. Organizations aren't perfect, they make mistakes, but to demonstrate not just the other work that you're doing, but that candor and communication to say, look, we made a mistake, we're going to do what we can to rectify it. I think that placates so many people, as opposed to just ignoring them and let them vent on social media and not being in that space. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens, I think, over the next kind of year or so.
I'd like to make a small plug in terms of information. It's actually a bit of an Arhag MTVH relay race. So if people watching this or listening to this have not heard of the Chartered Institute of Housing Rights Info platform, there's two parts of it. One is for sort of interested professionals, whatever level of housing you're involved in. And the other one is for people themselves, migrants in particular, who are navigating housing issues, or just to understand where their rights are. Actually, Arhag and other partners in BME National were founders of that, and we've taken over the funding baton now, and I've just agreed another 3 years of funding to continue and grow that. It's got about 8,000 readers a month at the moment, and we're hoping it continues. So if you've not heard of that or seen that, then Housing Rights Info is a great place to start.
Oh, that's great. 8,000 a month. That's a decent. It's not just one person, is it? Just sitting there, just trying to hit their KPIs.
No, but it is pretty much one person behind it all, which again goes to show you, in terms of coordinating and amassing resources from others, the information is out there.
But also the power that one person can have potentially. That was somebody's brainchild. Obviously, I imagine there was a few people who came up with it and made it happen. But to be able to make such an impact to so many people every month with actually relatively little resources, human resources, if you think about it, I suppose that is the power. So, we've talked a lot about some of the bigger issues. Knowing you both as I do, people of action. What do you think? Well, so let me ask you another question first. Should every housing association care about the migrant and refugee agenda? Because both of yours have that background in the history. But do you think this should be something on the agenda for every housing association?
Very short answer from me. Absolutely. We have lots of different types of people living in our homes and in our communities. And we should be ensuring that we understand what all of our community needs are. And we should be playing our social role, ensuring that people coming into our country are able to access the services and support and to play a meaningful role in the community that they settle in. So absolutely, we're housing providers, and we're a key player in community cohesion and togetherness. So absolutely.
Yeah, and just that word, kind of community cohesion, just taking it all the way back to that conversation we were having earlier about Ukraine. One of the issues, that came up, let's put the kind of racist card aside for a second. I'm sure there are lots of racist people who said, no, they're white, we'll take them in, we don't want any brown people. But, another argument that people were making is that, look, they're just similar to us in terms of culture and so on. And we understand that, and it'll be easier for these people to come and essentially integrate, assimilate, whatever language you want to use. But there's a big piece there, isn't there, about kind of, these multicultural communities that we have, and getting that message across that people aren't that other. Actually, we have these misconceptions, but I don't know what you think, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, all of the successful media campaigning, whatever you want to call it, that I've seen is about normalising folk, who people are and whether that's you being able to see that or actually just getting a chance to meet people and break bread as we do, which tends to dispel a lot of myths better than a litany of facts ever will do. Just because there's it's not an information problem. There's more information available to our fingertips than there ever has been. It's about feelings and trust, and actually there's nothing that's better about feelings and trust than getting to meet people and work together. And again, that's how housing associations, not just as landlords but as organisations that are active in a huge range of issues in their community over decades, that's where they play a part alongside others, because we're constantly organising, being involved in opportunities for people to meet and work together and break down barriers and break down myths. And that tends to do a lot to humanise. When you work out that that's not a refugee, that's a dad like me, or that's someone who likes football like me, or that's someone that's struggling with what to do next with education like me, or that's someone that actually is working their fingers to the bone like me. And actually at the end of the day, we're individuals. And so that refugee and migrant label is really just a journey. It's just a journey because of circumstance. It's not who you are as a person, and who you are is beyond that. And I'd like to think we could take courage from the fact that since the UN Refugee Convention in 1953, we've had decades of responding as a country to these moments. It's nothing new. And so if we've done it before, we can do it again.
Yeah, really well put. Call to action, really, over the next, let's say 12 months, some short-term, thinking here. What would you like to see happen over the next 12 months to really kind of push this along a bit more?
I mean, I think from our point of view, it's about more joint working. It's about tying up together with organisations that we've heard about today, and I think it's about having that joint vision to be able to deliver on the ground to make a difference. And I think for us, it's about making sure that we're supporting our partners to achieve their ambitions as well over the next 12 months. So I think, drawing it back, I think it's about Arhag as an organisation playing its role within its community, the sector, and enabling others to be able to deliver over that period of time. So I think it's about us being active and energised, but also looking outside to see what else we can do.
Brilliant. Tom?
Probably three for us. So for us and the government working together as partners, the challenges of the moment, particularly with Ukraine, require fresh thinking in terms of housing and housing supply. The great thing about that is that it's not just refugees and migrants that are needing housing. We also have other groups of people that are insecurely housed, people experiencing homelessness. There's a lot we can gain there from thinking in common, solidarity, working together on what is the same issue when it comes to supply. So I'd like to see some creativity around that, and there's some early signs that we might see that. I think in terms of the second thing, new parts of the country are going to experience welcoming refugees for the first time. One part of the Nationality and Borders Act that people are not talking about is how it changes dispersal from London, the Northwest, Wales, Scotland, the Northeast in particular, to actually a much greater group of communities across the UK. So you might be listening to this from rural Wiltshire thinking, what have refugees got to do with us, other than the people that have put their hand up to support Ukrainians? It's going to become personal soon. So now's the time, if you're active in those areas, to start talking to us, and the willingness is there to share. We're a surprisingly anti-competitive sector, so we've got a great opportunity to share, to collaborate, to visit, to open the box, both on what we've done really well and maybe some mistakes we've made, so you don't have to make them too. So that would be my second one, would be, if you're thinking this doesn't involve you, it really does, and it will do soon. And then I think the third one is a personal one for us and the Migration Foundation. Hanif, your words in the evaluation for one of our projects are ringing in my ears every day. It's something along the lines of, if we can't tackle the root causes of a crisis, we have to aggressively go after the symptoms, were something, I think, your words. And that's almost forming the basis of us thinking quite deeply about how we use our assets. And we won't abandon campaigning and we won't abandon advocating for change, but maybe actually we'll ground ourselves more locally and looking for actually just doing some stuff and getting some action and growing housing options ourselves, because the partners are out there, whether it's smaller housing associations, specialists, or actually local authorities themselves.
Yeah, there's so much to be done, isn't there? So I suppose we'd better wrap this up and go off and do some work. Dom, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us today, especially the first episode. Hope it wasn't too torturous for either of you.
Pleasure as well.
The pleasure was all ours. Suzanne, I don't know if you want to...
No, it's been fascinating conversation. Thank you both.
Brilliant. Well, that was fantastic. I suppose for anyone who's listening and watching, please do share this conversation with anyone who you think might be interested. If you're interested in reaching out to either Chris and Dom, I'm sure we'll have their details up. You actually sound like a quite good boy band, actually. Chris and Dom.
I'm probably an older boy band.
Well, the oldies are the goodies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll have both their contact details available somewhere in the description of what you're watching. If not, just Google Arhag or MTVH and their details will pop up. So thank you. And I suppose we look forward to all of our listeners and viewers tuning into the next episode.